You wake up in the middle of the night without knowing why. There's no sound that pulled you from sleep, no nightmare clinging to your thoughts. Your eyes simply open into the darkness. And in that instant, you understand that something is wrong. The air in the room feels heavier, thickened, as if every particle carries the weight of something that refuses to be named. Your heart begins to race, but the sound of it is swallowed by an absolute silence, the kind of silence so complete it makes your ears ring, like standing on the edge of a vast hollow space. You try to turn just a little, but your body doesn't respond. You try to lift your arm to move your toes, but every command vanishes before it reaches anything real. Your body is there, intact, unmistakably yours, yet control has been taken from you. Your chest tightens. Each breath becomes a struggle, as though something invisible has settled there, not heavy enough to kill you, but heavy enough to remind you that you are no longer in control. And then you feel it, not with your eyes, because you see nothing, not with your ears, because the room remains silent. It's something older than sight or sound, something instinctive, buried beneath language itself. There is a presence in the room. It isn't touching you. It isn't standing at the foot of the bed, but it's there, certainly there. It might be behind you. It might be in the corner. It might be hovering just above your chest, occupying the space your breath is trying to reach. You don't dare turn your head, not because you fear seeing something horrifying, but because you sense that if you look, you will see nothing at all. And that somehow is worse. Time begins to warp. Seconds stretch into minutes. Each heartbeat feels like a test. Will there be another breath after this one? The sensation of being watched doesn't fade. It clings quietly, like a gaze that doesn't require eyes. And then without warning, the weight is gone. You gasp, pulling in air so sharply it burns your throat. Control snaps back into your body. You sit upright, drenched in cold sweat, your heart pounding wildly, as if you've just escaped something that was impossibly close, something real. The room hasn't changed. Nothing is out of place. Nothing has been disturbed. The darkness is just darkness. The furniture sits exactly where it should. There is no evidence, no proof of intrusion, only the lingering certainty that moments ago you were not alone. By morning, you will look for explanations, fatigue, stress, a physiological event with a clinical name neatly described, efficiently explained. You will dismiss it because life does not allow you to linger on experiences that leave no proof. But somewhere deep inside, a quieter part of you knows this was not new. This feeling has existed for a very long time, long before this room was built, long before you were born. Thousands of years ago, when darkness was not broken by electric light, when people slept in crude homes and believed night itself had intent, they woke the same way. In the middle of the night, unable to move, a crushing weight on the chest, and always the certainty that something was near. Unlike you, they did not call it a phenomenon. They gave it a name. In ancient lands, where the first cities rose from mud and riverbanks, people believed there were dead who had been forgotten. No one spoke their names. No one brought offerings. No one acknowledged them. These spirits did not leave. They stayed hungry, resentful, crawling out of the darkness to climb onto the chests of the living, squeezing the breath from them, the way death had once squeezed the breath from their own bodies. Elsewhere, people spoke of a rider who mounted the sleeping a shadow that sat on the chest until the victim woke in terror. Some called it a demon. Some called it a spirit. Some refused to name it at all, believing that to speak its name was to invite it. The names differed. The forms differed. But the experience was disturbingly the same. A motionless human in the dark, an invisible weight, a presence that could not be proven by sight. You could say they were all wrong, that it was merely the brain betraying itself biological signals out of sync. But when millions of people, separated by centuries across civilizations that never met, describe the same fear, the same violation, inside the safest place, they know the question becomes something else entirely. The question is not whether the monster existed. The question is why humans needed to name that fear. History is not only what is recorded and celebrated, it is also what is forgotten, buried, dismissed as superstition or error. Entire civilizations once believed in creatures strongly enough to change how they slept, how they gave birth, how they buried their dead, how they treated one another. And then those creatures vanished, not because they were destroyed, but because they were no longer allowed to exist within the way humans understood the world. In this journey, we will follow the traces of those once named things, not to revive them, but to look directly at what they left behind. Rooms that were no longer safe, nights filled with whispers and fears that never began with monsters at all, but with the very real human experience of realizing that even in familiar darkness, we may not be alone. People don't tell the story to children, not because it is too frightening, but because they believe that simply hearing it allows them to remember the way back. It is a warning whispered among adults, passed from one family to another like a crack running quietly through generations. It does not begin with a monster. It begins with a death. In ancient lands, where the earth split under the sun and night stretched on like a room without windows, the dead did not disappear the moment their final breath left their lungs. They lingered, not in memory, but in a space between worlds. If death followed the proper rites, if their names were spoken, if bread and water were offered, if someone remembered them on the right days, they would settle into rest. But if there was a mistake, just one forgotten ritual, one name left unspoken, what remained was no longer human. Gidim had no fixed form. People did not draw, it did not carve it into stone, believing that doing so would give it a face to return with. They described only the sensation. A weight appears in the night, a cold that did not come from the wind, a hand that never touched the skin, yet tightened from within. Gidim did not scream. It did not hiss. It arrived in silence, as though forgetfulness itself had cleared a path for it to enter. Deaths began to appear in scattered patterns. A young, healthy man who had eaten normally the night before was found the next morning lying on his back, mouth slightly open as if he had tried to draw one final breath. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just a body gone cold in its sleep. Then a middle-aged woman, then a child. All died at night. All shared the same mark, as though their breath had been taken away piece by piece. People began to whisper, not about illness, not about poison, but about a name that had not been spoken, a bowl of water that had not been placed, a day of offering forgotten because of famine, because of war, because life demanded the living keep moving forward. Suspicion spread faster than fear. No one spoke it aloud, but every glance pointed to the same question which family had failed their dead. From then on, every night became a test of memory. People lay down and asked themselves whether they had remembered enough, whether they had spoken every name, whether anyone had been overlooked. Names were murmured in the dark, like a list of debts being repaid. Some placed bowls of water beside their beds. Some hung charms. Some slept, facing the door, believing that if Gidim came, they might at least see the darkness shift. But Gidim did not care about these measures. It did not come to kill at random. It came to remind. Each death was a wordless message to the living you have forgotten. And the greatest fear was not being suffocated in the night, but realizing that even unintentionally, you had become the cause. A family touched by Gidim not only loses a loved one, they lost their standing in the community. Condolences became careful. Gazes lingered longer than they should. No one said it outright, but everyone knew somewhere they had failed. That silence ate at them from within. They offered more. They prayed more. But the obsession did not fade because there was no way to know for certain that they had done enough. Slowly, The entire community lived in a state of exhausted vigilance. People did not only fear Gidim, they feared their own memory. They feared that one day, caught up in the demands of the living, they would forget the dead, that a single small oversight would be enough to open a door no one wished to see beyond. No one asked why the dead became this way. No one dared to, because asking meant confronting a far more terrifying possibility that these deaths were not caused by an angry spirit, but by the fragility of human life itself. And that was unbearable. It was far easier to believe that something else carried the blame. And so Gidim existed, not only in stories, but in the way people lived, in rituals repeated until they lost meaning, in a fear shared quietly without words. It allowed people to push guilt outside themselves, to place it onto an unseen spirit, so they could go on living without being crushed by the question of what if. Time passed, cities collapsed, languages shifted, old names were no longer pronounced correctly, and Gidim slowly vanished from official accounts. People said it had never existed, that it was merely a crude explanation for deaths without a clear cause. Yet on quiet nights, when someone wakes with a heavy chest and breath cut short, a very old thought still rises softly like a memory that belongs to no one in particular. Perhaps what was once called Gidim never disappeared. Only its name was forgotten, just like the dead it once represented. And the fear it left behind remains clinging tightly to humanity, reminding us that sometimes the most terrifying thing is not being harmed by a monster, but having to admit that we did not remember enough. The first night after giving birth, the mother does not sleep, not because of the baby's crying, but because of its silence. The breathing is so faint, she has to press her ear close to hear it steady but fragile, as if the room becoming just a little colder, the darkness a little thicker, might be enough for it to fade away. She lies on her side, one hand resting on the baby's chest, the other gripping the small amulet hanging at her neck, a piece of cold metal etched with symbols she does not truly understand, only told that they will help. She did everything right. At least she believes she did. She did not leave the house after sunset. She did not dwell on bad dreams. She did not speak forbidden words during pregnancy. She wore the amulet every day, even while bathing. She repeated the memorized prayers, even when her voice trembled so badly she could barely hear herself. But when night falls, all of it feels as fragile as the life lying in the cradle. They say Lamashtu does not need a door. It does not knock. It does not break locks. It enters through cracks. Humans cannot see cracks, not in walls or roofs, but in the mother's body itself. It does not appear as a monster meant to frighten children in stories. It arrives like a chill sliding across the skin, like a shadow that does not reflect the oil lamp's light. The mother does not see it, but she knows it is there with the same instinct that tells her her child is breathing. Some nights, she wakes with the certainty that someone is standing close to the cradle. There are no footsteps, no sound, only a change in the air, as if the room had been filled by something that does not belong there. She sits up suddenly, her heart pounding painfully, her eyes scanning every dark corner. There is nothing. Only the child lying there was too quiet. The deaths do not come all at once. That is what makes them terrifying. The baby does not die crying. It does not convulse. It leaves no sign that anyone can point to and call a cause. It simply weakens, like a lamp with its wick slowly turned down. The breaths grow farther apart. The skin grows colder, and by morning, when sunlight enters the room, the cradle is empty in an unmistakably different way. The mother does not scream, not at first. She only sits there, her mind hollow, her hands frozen as if the child has merely stepped away for a moment. Others arrive later. They look into the cradle, then at the mother, then at one another. No one speaks directly, but their eyes are already searching for the answer in the most familiar place. What did she do wrong? In the days that follow, the rituals are repeated, as if performing them once more might reverse what has happened. New amulets are hung. Old charms are smashed and buried at a crossroads. prayers are spoken louder longer. Someone brings a small figure of Pazuzu and places it above the cradle because it is said that only another demon can make Lamashtu hesitate. No one speaks of defeating it. They speak only of delaying it, of making it pause one more night. The mother stands at the center of this circle, both its focus and its suspect. Her body becomes a map under inspection. Every ache, every dream, every thought she had during pregnancy is revisited. Was she too afraid? Was she angry? Did she think things she should not have thought? These questions are not asked to understand, but to assign blame, because if the fault can be found in the mother, then the world still has order. Lamashtu needs a doorway, and they have found one. She begins to believe it, even though she does not want to. She replays every moment of her pregnancy, every restless night, every prayer spoken without full attention. Each memory turns into evidence against her. The grief of losing a child merges with the guilt placed upon her, forming something heavier than death itself. She has not only lost her baby, she has lost the right to be seen as a victim. The stories spread through the community without detail. It is enough to say that Lamashtu visited that house, and everyone understands what they are meant to understand. Other women begin to look at their own bodies with suspicion. They sleep less. They pray more. They police their thoughts as if a single improper idea might invite the monster in. Their bodies are no longer places where life begins, but gateways that might open to darkness at any moment. Lamashtu is not driven away. It is only delayed. That is what ensures the fear never leaves. Each child who survives the night is not proof of victory, but a reminder that the monster chose not to come this time, and that choice can change at any moment. Over time, prayers become mechanical. Rituals are performed not out of faith, but out of fear. No one asks what Lamashtu is or where it came from. They only care about how to keep it from visiting their own home, and if it visits someone else's, at least they can tell themselves they did enough. As ancient names fade from speech, Lamashtu fades with them like a shadow erased from a wall. People adopt new words, new explanations, cleaner, more reasonable ones. But the obsession does not disappear with the name. It only moves. It lingers in the way pregnant women are watched in the silence surrounding deaths, without explanation in the question that is never spoken aloud. If Lamashtu ever existed, it did not only step into cradles at midnight. It stepped into humanity's need for a culprit when tragedy strikes, and settled where the burden was easiest to place. And even when the monster is no longer named, its footprints remain etched deeply into bodies once believed to be the doorway through which darkness entered the world. That night you go to sleep like any other. No prayers, no charms, no sense that you need protection from anything at all. You turn off the light roll onto your side and let your body sink into the familiar shape of the bed. There is no warning, no intuition. Sleep arrives heavy and deep. Then you wake up, not completely. Your awareness rises before your body does, like someone arriving early to a room that hasn't been unlocked yet. Your eyes open, but the image is blurred. Darkness presses close to your face, so close it feels like it's touching your eyelids. You try to move just to adjust your position, but nothing happens. Your body doesn't respond. You try again. Still nothing. Your chest begins to feel heavy. At first it's vague, like resting a hand on your chest while breathing deeply. Then it increases slowly, deliberately. Each time you try to inhale, the weight presses down a little more, as if something is learning the rhythm of your breath. It doesn't hurt. There's just not enough air. There is no sound, no sign of a presence, only pressure. You try to scream. Your throat tightens, but no sound comes out. Your tongue won't move. Your jaw is locked. You realize that if this goes on much longer, panic will set in. And once panic arrives, there will be nowhere for it to go. Then you see it. Not clearly, not fully. Just a shape at the edge of your vision where the room's weakest light can't reach. It might be a person. It might be something only pretending to be one. It isn't standing. It isn't walking. It is simply there, as if it has always been there, waiting for you to open your eyes. The shape doesn't move, but you feel it leaning closer. The distance between you and it can't be measured by sight, only by breath. Each time you try to inhale, that distance shrinks. You don't know if it has a face, and you're not sure you want to know. Part of you hopes it doesn't. Another part fears that if it doesn't, then whatever this is far worse than you imagined. Time collapses into a meaningless loop. Try to breathe, not enough. Try to move, nothing. Darkness, wait, presence, again, again, again. You begin to think that maybe you're already dead, and this is how death happens. Not violently, just being held in place, forced to lie still, observed. Then just as suddenly, it releases you. The weight vanishes so quickly you barely register what happened. You drag in a breath so deep it burns your lungs. Your body jerks as if it's been handed back to you by something reluctant to let go. You sit up, heart racing wildly, eyes sweeping the room on instinct. There is no one there. Nothing. The room is the same, cold and familiar in a way that feels almost cruel. But something has changed. The bed is no longer safe. In the nights that follow, you become afraid to sleep. Not afraid of the dark, but afraid of the moment your eyes close. Afraid of letting go. Afraid of allowing your awareness to leave its post. You sleep with the light on, then with the light off, but the door open, then with the radio playing all night just to hear another human voice. None of it truly works, because whatever it is does not come from outside. They once called it the Alp, or the mare, or something else depending on where you lived. A rider of sleepers, something that sits on the chest, drains the breath, and leaves terror behind, like aftershocks from an earthquake. Some said it was a demon. Some said it was a witch in another shape. Others believed it was a cursed acquaintance coming at night without knowing it. Different explanations, same experience, uncomfortably identical. The Alp doesn't kill you. That's what makes it dangerous. It lets you live, but it never gives you your sleep back the way it was. Every time you lie down, you become hyper-aware of your body in ways you never were before. Your breathing, your heartbeat, the slightest pressure on your chest. You begin to fear your own biology because you no longer trust that it belongs to you. Your body becomes unfamiliar, a machine that might betray you at any moment in the night. Some people place scissors under their pillows. Others hang charms above the bed. Some sleep facing the door, believing the Alp only comes from behind. These rituals are not meant to defeat the monster. They exist to make people feel like they are doing something, anything, however small, however useless, because helplessness is the one thing humans cannot endure. Then time moves on. New words appear, new explanations. People say it has only disrupted sleep, the brain waking before the body, a minor malfunction in a biological system. The Alp is pushed out of the story, reduced to an old name, a figure in forgotten books. But the experience does not leave with the name. You can still wake up in the night, unable to move. Your chest can still feel heavy. The darkness can still thicken in ways that make no sense. Only now there is no monster to blame. There is only you lying there trapped inside your own body, wondering how something that does not exist can feel so undeniably real. When the Alp disappeared from language, it did not take the fear with it. It only took its name, and that made the experience lonelier than ever. Because once when this happened, you could whisper a name into the darkness and believe you understood what was happening. Now you can only lie there, counting your breaths, waiting, hoping that whatever is sitting on your chest will leave before you begin to believe that maybe it never needed a shape to exist at all. The first person died in winter, before the snow had time to melt from the rooftops. He was the pillar of the family, strong enough to clean the livestock pens himself in the mornings, clear-minded enough to tell stories to the children before bed. Death came at night, quiet and efficient, so clean that no one realized anything was wrong. They found him lying on his back in bed, mouth slightly open, eyes closed, as if he had simply forgotten to wake up. The physician said his heart had stopped, The priest performed the rites. They buried him the next day because winter does not wait for anyone. 3 days later, the eldest son began to cough violently, not an ordinary cough. It was dry and hollow, tearing the air from deep inside his chest, folding his body inward with every spasm. By the second night, he no longer had the strength to stand. By morning, he was dead, then the mother, then another child. Death followed an unsettling order, as if someone were methodically crossing names off a list inside the house. They began to keep records, not on paper but in collective memory. Who died first? Who followed? How many days lay between each death? The pattern was too tight to be dismissed as chance. Neighbors gathered at the gate, whispering, staring at the house, the way one looks at something infected. No one went inside anymore. No one let their children come near. That family became a dark point in the village, a place where death seemed to have found a familiar path. Someone spoke an old name, not aloud, only in a whisper. Naxarer, a corpse that consumes the living. People believed the first to die had not rested, that inside the coffin it had awakened. It did not rise. It did not leave the grave. It simply lay there, chewing, not flesh, but the burial shroud. And with every piece of cloth consumed, another living relative would die above ground. The idea spread faster than fear itself. It explained the order of deaths. It allowed people to point to a specific cause buried in the earth. Instead of facing something invisible and unknowable, if the Naxarer existed, then this disaster could be stopped, and the only way to be certain was to open the grave. They waited until night, not for ritual reasons, but because daylight would have made the act feel too real. The men carried shovels and torches, walking slowly, not speaking. The ground had hardened with cold. Each strike of the shovel made a dry, hollow sound, as if striking something that did not wish to be disturbed. When the coffin lid was lifted, no one stepped back, but everyone held their breath. The body did not look as expected. It was not shriveled, not decayed. The skin was taut, darker than it should have been, as if something like vitality still lingered beneath it. The mouth was slightly open. The shroud had shifted, torn near the jaw. Someone swore they heard a faint sound like swallowing, but no one dared confirm it. They only looked at one another, and in their eyes the decision had already been made, long before the ground was broken. The ritual was swift and decisive. There was no hesitation, no long prayer. They placed a large stone in the corpse's mouth so it could not chew any further. Some places used coins, some used bricks. Here they used whatever was hard and heavy enough. Then came the acts no one wanted to remember, but everyone performed because the alternative was worse. They cut, they pinned, they separated the body into parts that could never be reassembled, not out of hatred, but out of fear. The next morning, no one else in the family died, at least not for several days. That was enough to confirm the belief. The Naxarer had been stopped. The village exhaled. The story was retold as proof that the action had been necessary, that the cruelty had been justified. But no one spoke of what remained. That family never returned to what it had been. The survivors looked at one another differently. Death was no longer something that came from outside, but from within their own blood. Relatives became potential threats. When someone fell ill, people did not only worry, they watched. When someone died, grief was warped by an unspoken question. Would this one drag the rest of the family into the grave? Naxarer accomplished what few monsters ever did. It did not only kill, it shattered the safest structure humans have. The family meant to be the final refuge became the starting point of fear. Death was no longer an ending, but the beginning of suspicion. Every funeral carried a layer of quiet anxiety. Every grave might be a mouth waiting to open. Over time, new words emerged. New explanations were accepted. People spoke of disease, of contagion, of causes that did not require graves to be opened. Naxarer faded from official records, becoming a story of superstition, but the rituals it created lingered long after. The willingness to harm the dead to protect the living. The acceptance that under certain circumstances, Collective violence was not only permitted but considered righteous. When the name Naxarer was no longer spoken, people believed the danger had passed. But the fear it planted in the way humans look at those closest to them did not fade so easily. It remained in cautious glances, in decisions made too quickly when death appears, in the thought that sometimes the greatest threat does not come from outside the house, but from what was once loved and buried beneath the cold earth. At first it was only whispers in narrow streets where oil lamps failed to reach the rooftops. Adults spoke softly to one another, believing children could not hear. But children always hear. They caught the words swallowed between breaths. Strix, nightbird, witch. Something that flew low enough for its shadow to slide across a child's window. No one agreed on what Strix was. Some said it was a large bird, its round eyes unblinking, its beak curved and cold. Others believed it was an old woman who looked ordinary by day and grew wings at night, but every story shared the same core. Strix appeared when a child slept alone, and by morning the cradle was emptier than it should have been. No screams, no clear marks, only a silence that should not exist. They said Strix did not tear down doors or break locks. It didn't need to. It perched on rooftops and waited. When the room sank into the steady rhythm of sleep, when adults were too exhausted to hear anything but their own heartbeat, Strix moved closer. Its wings did not sound like a bird's. There was no heavy flapping, only a shift in the air, just enough to make the flame of an oil lamp tremble. The deaths always happened at night. By day, everything seemed normal. The child still laughed, still cried, still wrapped tiny fingers around a mother's hand. Then night arrived. By morning, the body was colder than it should have been, lighter than it should have been. Mothers could not bring themselves to look directly into the cradle. Fathers stood motionless, as if any movement might make what had happened feel more real. No one claimed to have seen Strix clearly, but everyone knew someone who had. A shadow passing over the roof, a pair of eyes reflecting moonlight, a short cry sounding like a child's voice crushed in the throat. These fragments clung together enough to form a shape without ever becoming clear. Adults began protecting children with whatever they had. Thorn branches hung outside the windows, symbols drawn in charcoal on door frames. Small knives were placed beneath pillows, not to be used, but because Strix was said to fear cold metal. Some families stopped letting children sleep alone. Others kept lamps burning all night, even though oil was expensive. These measures did not always work, but they created the feeling that something was being done instead of simply waiting for one's turn. Children grew up inside that atmosphere. They learned to be quiet after dark, learned not to look up at rooftops, learned that night was not a time for curiosity, but for avoidance. Strix became the reason behind every rule. Don't go out after sunset. Don't talk to strangers. Don't stay up late. Don't misbehave, because Strix is watching. The fear did not stay in the sky. It turned back toward the ground. When a woman lived alone without children, without a husband, people began to look at her differently. If she went out at night, someone remembered. When a child died, someone whispered that she had passed through that street the night before. No proof was needed. It was enough that Strix existed as a possibility. Adults used Strix to control not only children, but one another. The difference became dangerous, an unusual habit. A glance held too long. Someone who did not move in step with the rest of the street. All of it could be pulled a little closer to Strix. And when fear grows large enough, it no longer needs to be precise. But Strix did not disappear simply because people were afraid. There were nights when every precaution had been taken, and the cradle was still empty by morning. Then no one spoke of charms or symbols anymore, only questions that were never voiced. Why this house? Why this child? Why did none of the protections matter? As time passed, Strix changed shape in the telling. In some places, it was a bird. In others, a demon. In others, people said it plainly a witch. But the obsession remained the same. Night was dangerous. Children were the most vulnerable, and adults, no matter how vigilant, could not watch forever. Strix did more than take lives. It left behind a generation raised in alertness. Children who once lay awake, listening to the wind on rooftops, grew into adults who never slept deeply. They became parents who checked cradles in the middle of the night, people who believed that if they relaxed even for a moment, something would come. Then one day, people stopped saying the name Strix. New explanations took their place, drier, easier to record. But in old streets, when night falls and wind slides across tiled roofs, there are still parents who instinctively pull their children closer. No one says why, but everyone remembers. There were once things that flew over children's roofs, and even if the name is gone, its shadow has never truly left. After the nights when Strix was said to fly over rooftops, fear did not fade. It only changed direction. From the sky, it crept down to the ground, following damp dirt roads, where evening mist clung thickly and wagon wheels carved grooves like wounds that had not yet closed. People began to tell stories of a figure who did not need to sneak into houses or touch the living, a figure who only needed to speak a name. In Ireland, they called him the Dullahan. No one claimed to have seen him clearly. Only fragments survived, stitched together across generations. A headless rider on a horse, black as a moonless night, a severed head tucked beneath one arm, eyes wide and unblinking, staring in every direction at once. A mouth stretched into a smile so tight it looked as if the skin might tear. And when the rider stopped, when the sound of hooves faded from the road, that head would speak. Not a scream, not a roar, just an ordinary voice, disturbingly familiar, calling your name. They said that when you heard your name spoken from the darkness, your heart slowed for a brief instant, as if the body had not yet understood what had happened. Some people turned around by instinct, the way you would when someone you knew called out. Others froze in place because deep down, they already understood this was not an invitation. It was a notice. The Dullahan does not kill. He does not need to. He comes only to announce that everything has already been decided. Death will arrive, whether that night or days later. An accident, an illness, a sudden stroke, a fall no one witnesses. The cause does not matter. What matters is the moment he speaks your name, because that moment seals your fate. There are stories of people who heard their names called in the late afternoon, when the sun was still low. They knew they had a little time left. Others heard it at midnight. By morning, their houses were closed. Funerals were held quietly. No one said it could have been avoided because everyone understood that with the Dullahan, there is no if only. The Irish believed there was only one thing that could make him turn away gold, not for its value, but for its nature. Gold does not rust. It does not rot. It does not change. It represents sunlight life, something the Dullahan cannot touch. A gold coin thrown onto the road could make him veer aside. A gold ring raised at the right moment could make the horse hesitate, but gold is rare, and no one knows when it will appear. So most people do not resist. They listen instead. They listen to every sound at night. The clatter of hooves might be imagination, but what if it isn't? Every noise becomes a sign. Every coincidence takes on meaning. From that point on, people begin to live in anticipation, not anticipation of hope, but of the call. When a dog howls at night, conversations stop. When someone hears their name carried on the wind, even if they are unsure, a chill runs through them. A mild illness is no longer trivial. A strange dream can feel like an omen. The Dullahan does not need to appear often. The possibility that he might is enough. The elders say the worst part is not dying after hearing your name. The worst part is the time in between, when you still have to live to eat, to speak with others, while a single question echoes constantly in your mind, when every action feels final. Every word could be the last one spoken. Some try to flee. They leave their villages. They change their names. But the Dullahan does not search with human ears. He finds something deeper, something bound to you more tightly than your face. There are stories of people who took new names and lived peacefully for years, until one night they heard the Old One spoken aloud, the name no one used anymore. By morning, they were dead in their sleep. Gradually, the Dullahan becomes a shadow behind every decision. People marry earlier, afraid of running out of time. They apologize more quickly, afraid there will be no second chance. Others live recklessly, reasoning that if death is fixed, fear is pointless. The monster does more than foretell death. It reshapes how the living view every remaining day. Time passes. Roads are lit. New explanations emerge. People stop talking about the headless rider, but the feeling remains the sense that death can call your name at any moment. Only now, no one hears the voice. No one sees the black horse. All that remains is a vague vigilance clinging to every thought. The Dullahan does not need to be remembered by name to exist. He lives in the habit of interpreting every sign in the worst possible way, in the way people turn every sound, every coincidence into a final message. And when you suddenly hear your name in an unclear moment, when your heart stutters for just a single beat, it is because long ago, humanity learned to live as if death were always calling from a distance. In the north, where the ground never truly warms and the cold sinks deeper than bone, people do not believe death is an ending. They believe some die and refuse to leave. Not because they are called back, but because they cling to this world with something heavier than flesh itself, resentment and greed. These beings are called Draugr. A Draugr does not wander. It stays exactly where it lived, where it died, where it buried something it could not let go of. A low burial mound on a hillside, an abandoned house by the sea, a hoard hidden beneath frozen soil. By day, these places seem harmless. But when night falls, when the northern wind drags across stone and earth, the Draugr wakes. They say a Draugr does not resemble an ordinary corpse. It does not lie still. Its body is swollen heavy, as if filled with the earth and seawater. The skin is gray-blue, stretched tight under moonlight. The eyes are open, not clouded, but glowing in the dark, like embers that never went out. It can rise from its grave without haste, without concealment, because the land it inhabits already belongs to death. A Draugr guards its possessions the way it guards itself. The gold and silver buried with it are not meant for the next world, but to keep the living away. Anyone who dares disturb it pays the price. Livestock are found slaughtered without reason. Travelers disappear. Those reckless enough to dig into the mound never return, or they return hollow-eyed, unable to speak anything except delirious fragments that linger until death. In the old sagas, there is always a hero who is named, not because he is the bravest, but because there is no other choice. When the Draugr makes an entire region unlivable, when death spills out of the grave and enters daily life, someone must confront it. The encounter is nothing like a fight between the living. The Draugr is stronger, heavier, and does not tire. They say that when grappling with a Draugr, you are not only fighting its body, you are fighting the weight of death itself. With every shove, the Draugr grows heavier, as if the ground itself is pulling it toward you. It can change size, swelling in the darkness, pinning its opponent against stone or earth. There is no roar, no scream, only ragged breath and relentless pressure. Defeating a Draugr is never as simple as striking it down. The rites are always brutal. It must be pinned, the head must be severed, the body must be burned, and the ashes buried elsewhere, separated from the original grave. In some places, the Draugr's head is placed between its legs, so it cannot rise again. These acts are not done in silence. They are performed before the community, as a declaration that death must be forced to release its grip. Yet even when a Draugr is destroyed, no one celebrates, because victory always leaves aftershocks. The living understand that death does not automatically grant release. There are people who, even after the heart has stopped, refuse to let go of what they held in life. Greed does not die with the body. Resentment does not fade with the final breath. Stories of the Draugr taught the people of the North to see death differently. Not everyone who dies finds rest. Proper burial is not enough. What matters more is how a person lived before dying. To live too greedily, too cruelly, too attached is to risk being pulled back by those very things after death. Over time, people stopped believing that Draugr rose from their graves. Burial mounds were flattened, hoards were unearthed, sagas became stories, but the thought remained quiet and unsettling. There are things in humans that do not die when humans do. Some desires stretch beyond the boundary, and when someone dies, leaving behind unresolved conflict, lingering hatred unspent, greed, people still whisper, even without using the name, that perhaps somewhere in the darkness, a part of them is still standing guard over what they refused to release heavy and awake, just as the Draugr once did. When the Draugr no longer rose from their burial mounds, when stories of swollen bodies and glowing eyes were recalled only as old sagas, people said the monsters were dead. Not defeated, but replaced. New explanations arrived cleaner, more orderly. Religion said the dead had been judged. Science said corpses were nothing more than decaying matter. There was no longer room for guardians of buried treasure in the night. No longer room for grudges that walked on dead legs. Monsters disappeared from language first. No one dared write their names into new records. No one taught children that something might be watching from the dark. The stories once told around fires were dismissed as superstition, as echoes of an ignorant age. People learned to laugh when Draugr Lamashtu or Strix were mentioned. Laughter is the fastest way to bury a fear, but monsters never lived only in stories. They lived in experience, in the crushing weight on the chest that Alp once brought. In the moment, a mother woke, knowing her child was no longer breathing, though no one had entered the room. In the chain of deaths that moved through a family, leaving questions with no answers. Those things did not vanish just because they were given new names. When religion spoke, it said everything had meaning. Death was a test. Loss was the will of a higher power. Monsters were no longer needed because fear had been gathered beneath a single authority. When science spoke, it said everything had a cause: illness, accidents, genetics, cold, precise words that did not need darkness to exist. Yet both did the same thing. They took fear that once belonged to the community and placed it inside the individual. Before, if a monster came, the entire village trembled together. The entire village performed rituals. The entire village shared responsibility. Now when fear arrives, it knocks on one door at a time and closes it behind you. There is no Gidim left to blame when someone dies in their sleep. There is only the question of why you didn't notice sooner. There is no Lamashtu to explain why an infant dies in the night. Only numbers, statistics, and suspicious eyes turned toward the mother. There is no Dullahan calling your name. Only diagnoses that make you wait for death in silence unseen by anyone else. Monsters were once outside. They had shapes, names, places. People could flee from them, fight them, perform rituals, to drive them away. When monsters were killed, fear did not die with them. It only lost its form. It became a nameless feeling, something you cannot point to or share. It settles in your head, your chest in the nights. You cannot sleep and do not know why. The most frightening thing is that when there are no monsters left to fear, people begin to fear themselves. They fear their bodies betraying them. They fear their minds producing images they cannot control. They fear that if something goes wrong, it is because they were not good enough, not careful enough, not knowledgeable enough. Fear becomes personal, and with it comes guilt. Once, when a village was haunted, no one said it was one person's fault. Now, when someone collapses, society asks what they did wrong. When monsters existed, they carried the burden for humanity. When monsters disappeared, the burden returned heavier than before because there was nowhere left to set it down. Monsters died and took rituals with them. There are no protective circles anymore, no banishing rites, no collective act that says this fear does not belong to you alone. In their place come individual instructions. Be strong, be informed, take responsibility. Words that sound reasonable but feel cold when you are facing something you cannot control. And in that empty space, new monsters begin to form. They have no clear shape. They do not need names. They do not crawl from graves, fly over rooftops, or call to you in the night. They whisper that you are not enough. They remind you that if something goes wrong, it is your fault. They do not need myth to survive because they are fed by the way the modern world works. The monsters were killed, but fear learned how to survive. It adapted. It hid. And when you think you have escaped the darkness of old stories, you are only standing in another kind of darkness, quieter, unnamed, and because of that, far harder to face. It has no shape, no claws, no wings, no glowing eyes in the dark. It does not crawl out of graves, does not fly over rooftops, does not call your name in the middle of the night, but it is there, very close, so close that you cannot turn around to look at it because it is already inside your head. At first, it is only a vague sensation, a slight tension when you wake up in the morning, a pressure on your chest with no clear source, like what Alp once did, except this time there is no shadow in the room. You can still breathe. You can still move. And that is exactly what makes it more dangerous. There is no obvious sign that something is attacking you. Ancient monsters came from the outside. You could point and say, "It's over there." Draugr in the grave, Strix on the roof, Dullahan at the end of the road. But the modern monster gives you no such distance. It does not stand across from you. It blends into the voice inside your head, speaking your own language in a tone so familiar you do not realize it is not you. It tells you that you must succeed, not for glory or honor, but because if you do not, you will become useless. It does not threaten you with death, but with erasure. No one needs you. No one remembers you. In this world, existing without value is more terrifying than not existing at all. This is the new curse, more refined than anything the old monsters ever brought. In the past, if Lamashtu came, the entire community trembled together. Now, if you fail, you suffer alone. In the past, Draugr guarded its treasure and its grudges, standing watch between the living and the dead. Now, greed does not need to die to become monstrous. It thrives in numbers, rankings, and performance metrics that no one dares to question. The new monster needs no ritual to drive it away. It fears neither gold nor light. It grows strongest under the white glow of office lamps, in screens that shine all night in endless comparisons. It feeds every time you see someone moving faster than you, every time you feel slower, weaker, or insufficient. Strix once made children afraid of the dark. The modern monster makes adults afraid of daylight itself, afraid of unread emails, afraid of unexpected calls, afraid of long silences where no notification arrives to confirm that you are still needed. Fear is no longer tied to a moment. It stretches on dull and constant, never letting you rest. Dullahan once called your name to announce death. The monster now whispers your name every day, reminding you that if you do not push harder, if you stop, if you weaken, another kind of death is waiting. Not the death of the body, but the death of position, of meaning, of a reason to exist in the eyes of others. What makes it more frightening than all the monsters before it is that it is not treated as an enemy. It is praised. It is called motivation, ambition, and discipline. What was once a curse is now a standard. You are not allowed to fear it because fear means weakness, and weakness is unacceptable. Ancient monsters could be defeated even if the price was high. Draugr was beheaded. Strix was driven away. Alp vanished when people learned to name sleep. But the nameless monster is different. It does not need to be defeated. It only needs you to believe it is right. That pressure is normal. That exhaustion proves effort. That if you collapse, it is a personal failure, not the result of something tightening around you every day. In a world with no monsters left to fear, humans learn to hunt themselves. No legends required, no curses needed, just a thought repeated often enough. And when you lie down at night, no longer afraid of something entering the room, yet still unable to sleep, that is when you understand. The monster did not disappear. It simply learned how to live inside your head quietly, patiently, and closer than anything that was ever given a name. In the past, when fear appeared, it never came alone. It had a name, it had a shape, and more importantly, it had a place within the community. When a child died in the night, the mother was not left sitting alone with an unanswered question. People spoke the name Lamashtu. They hung charms, burned incense, gathered together, not because those rituals truly drove the monster away, but because they told the grieving person, this is not yours to carry alone. When someone was pinned in their sleep, unable to breathe, seeing a figure in the room, they were not told it was weakness or imagination. People said Alp had come. They were taught to place iron under the pillow, to turn their shoes toward the door, to sleep beside another person. Fear was moved outside the body. The experience was acknowledged, and the one who suffered was not abandoned with themselves. Rituals were never solutions. They were acknowledgments. Acknowledgments that some things lie beyond control, that not every tragedy has a clear cause, that sometimes all humans can do is stand beside one another in the dark instead of trying to force light into it. In the past, when Gidim was believed to return and choke the living, the entire family looked inward together. Was there someone whose name had been forgotten? Someone who had not been honored? Guilt was shared. Responsibility was spread out. Even if the belief was wrong, it allowed people to go on living without being crushed by the question of why it happened to them. Now, when monsters are no longer named, pain becomes solitary. When a child dies, statistics are offered. When someone breaks down, diagnoses are given. When someone cannot bear the pressure, they are asked whether they tried hard enough. There are no rituals to gather around. No long nights where an entire village stays awake together. Only closed rooms where each person faces fear alone. In the past, suffering had a language, symbols, stories that could be told and retold, saying humans have endured this before and survived. Now suffering is broken into individual cases. You hurt because you are not strong enough. You collapse because you are not capable enough. You cannot sleep because you failed to manage yourself. Community was once the place where fear could be set down, not to disappear, but so it would not have to be carried alone. When Strix was believed to fly over rooftops, the entire street stayed awake. Lamps were lit not only to push back darkness, but to see one another, to know that if something terrible happened, it happened among people who were present. Today, lights are brighter than ever, yet everyone is more alone. Screens glow through the night, but no one touches anyone else. There is no ritual to close a tragedy, no shared moment to say this happened and we are still here. What we have lost is not the monsters. It is the ability to share fear without having to justify it. The ability to admit that some things cannot be fixed, cannot be explained, cannot be optimized. When everything must have an answer, experiences without answers become personal burdens. In the past, monsters carried guilt for humanity. Now, humans carry guilt for the system. When there are no rituals, no community, fear does not disappear. It simply moves quietly from shared spaces into the individual, and there no one else can see it. No one else can carry it with you. Perhaps the most frightening thing is not that we once believed in monsters. It is that when the monsters disappeared, we also lost the ways to tell one another you are not enduring this alone. That night you wake up again, not because of a loud noise, not because of a vivid nightmare, just a very small moment when your body opens its eyes before your thoughts do. The room is still there. Familiar walls, a familiar ceiling, dim light spilling in from the window exactly as it does every other night. There is no dark figure standing by the bed, no voice calling your name, no wings brushing across the roof. And that is exactly what makes your heart slow in a way that feels wrong. In the past, in a moment like this, people would have thought of Alp or Gidim or something that could be named, a presence from outside, invading private space, carrying a clear and recognizable fear. But now you lie there fully awake, completely alone, with nothing you can point to. There is no monster in the room, but the feeling is still there. It sits in your chest, light but persistent, a passing thought that tomorrow will be exhausting, that there is something unfinished. If you fall back asleep, time will move on without you, and you will fall behind. No one says this to you. No voice rises from the darkness, but you hear it clearly. You turn over. The room does not change. Everything is where it should be. Yet your body refuses to relax. It has learned to stay alert, even without a visible threat. Like children who once grew up under roofs where Strix was believed to fly. They slept, but they never slept deeply. Monsters once had shape. They forced humans to face fear directly, to gather together, to give a name to what was haunting them. When Gidim appeared, people remembered the dead. When Lamashtu was named, helplessness was acknowledged. When Draugr was dug up, greed and resentment were confronted. Monsters forced people to look at what they did not want to see. Then they faded. Not overnight, not in a final battle. They slowly slipped out of language, out of shared memory. And at the same time, fear learned how to exist without a form. Now no one says that something is standing in your room, yet countless people wake in the night with the same sensation, a nameless tension, a pressure with no clear source, a worry that light and explanations cannot dissolve. There is no ritual to perform, no community to call, only the quiet instruction that you must handle it yourself. Monsters no longer need doors to enter because the boundary is gone. They are no longer confined outside, in forests, in graves on rooftops. They've been brought inside, trained and normalized. They carry names that sound reasonable: responsibility, expectation, productivity, self-worth. In the past, when a monster came, it was a disaster. Now, when you collapse, it's called personal failure. In this world, fear does not need to roar. It only needs to stay still and let you blame yourself for feeling it at all. You lie there in a familiar room. There is nothing to drive away, nothing to fight, only the sense that even though you are safe, something is wrong. And perhaps the most frightening thing is not that monsters once existed, but that we have learned how to live without naming them anymore. Monsters did not disappear. They simply stopped standing in front of you. They stand behind your thoughts. They speak in your voice. They convince you that everything you carry is natural, necessary, something you must accept. When you close your eyes again, the room remains silent. But whatever is there does not need sound. It has been with you long enough to no longer rely on old forms of fear. And in that silence lies an unsettling truth. Monsters no longer need a shape because we have learned how to carry them inside ourselves.